my first summer job, which he helped create, was when I was 15.
Okay.
So he owned a transportation company, they call it a freight forwarding company. So not a shipping company, but they're a logistics organizer and stuff. And part of the company was a moving section, so where they helped people that were moving overseas, right? So.
Always thought about you as someone that's so involved with the community that you're in. You've always been really involved, and part of it is because of the business that you have.
Yep.
That you're a part of. But part of it is just because of the kind of person you are. There are other people in those businesses that aren't involved with their community.
True. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you've been a big part of it. Yeah. And I want to thank you for coming here.
Appreciate that.
And
yeah.
really,
good to see you.
Good to see you too, because you've left Japan now.
Yeah.
You're not here anymore.
Yeah.
How many years did you? How many years did you spend here?
So I arrived in October '98 and left in March 2020. So just almost 22 years. So.
Right. That's right.
Long ride.
And that was all with Asian Tigers?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were always the head of
the company. Yeah. It was. There were a lot of different things that resembled firsts here in Japan. So I've been in the moving business my whole career. So that started back when I was in my early 20s. So I started in Canada, which is where I was born. Born in Eastern Canada. My parents are both Dutch. They migrated to Canada at the tender age of, it was either 18 or 19, something like that. My dad didn't want to go into the military, which was a required service back at the time. So he was sitting there going, okay, well, how can I dodge this?
You mean in Canada?
In Holland. In Holland. In Holland,
okay.
Yeah. So he had to go into the military.
So that's how he came
to Canada. Yeah. So he went there because his sister had moved there because
wait. Was he Vietnam era?
No. So yeah, my dad, if he was still alive, he'd be 83. Yeah.
Okay. So he was.
Yeah. So this was like post World War II era.
It would have to be. He would have missed World War II.
Yeah. So he lived through World War II.
I know, but he wasn't old enough to go into it.
Correct. Yeah. So anyway, parents moved to Canada. I was born in Canada. Sister was born in Canada. We lived initially in Montreal, on the far east side of Canada.
You're the first child?
I was the first child.
How many years difference between you and your sister?
Me and my sister were 4 years apart.
Are you guys close?
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty good. Well, like lots of siblings, I guess you have your ups and downs and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I would say we became a lot closer together after we became adults. So, but
remember, she's going to see this.
Huh?
She's going to see this.
Well, she'll probably agree with a lot of it.
Okay, all right.
And then Montreal was part of the French-speaking part of Canada at the time, and I'm getting into a whole bunch of stuff that maybe isn't too relevant, but there was a lot of political tension back in Quebec at that time, right? There was a separatist movement that the French-speaking part of Canada, the province of Quebec, wanted to separate from Canada.
What year are we talking now?
That would have been in the late 60s.
Separate.
Well, this has happened a couple times, but this was in the early years, right? So, and that mushroomed into, I think the political violence happened after that. But anyway, I was attending an English-speaking elementary school in 1969, and they had, if I'm correct, I think they ended up having 2 bomb scares at my elementary school. So I think there was an initial one, and then when the second one happened, that's when my dad said, "That's it, we're getting out of here." So he was.
But you never learned to speak French, or did you?
I think I spoke a reasonable amount of French at the beginning, because in the early in my very young years, I actually was multilingual because I spoke Dutch because my parents were Dutch. The area of Montreal we were living in was actually Italian speaking. So at the age of 4, I actually spoke Italian pretty fluently because I was hanging out with all the kids there. French as well, because I think there were more French people in that area than English-speaking people. So my weakest language at the age of 4 was English.
Okay.
And my mom said the main reason you understood English, at least a little bit, was from watching television, like
Okay.
watching cartoons and stuff.
Right.
But then that all shifted when we moved. From the age of 4, we moved to an English-speaking suburb within Montreal, and the Italian is gone.
Right.
Maintain the Dutch. I can still get
And
by
you
a
had to
little
do
bit of Dutch.
French.
Well, everybody that goes to school in Canada, and depending on the province you're in, you would have that was a required subject.
Okay.
So I continued to take French until I finished. I think when I was going to school, I had to continue doing it till I was finished grade 10. But because I was quite good at it, I continued doing it till the end of high school.
Oh, so you speak French, okay.
Well, that was a long time
A
ago.
long time
A
ago.
long time ago.
Right.
So,
Are your
yeah.
mom and dad doing okay now?
So they actually divorced when my sister and I were growing up. So it was an unusual situation. They actually my mom ended up taking my sister, so they lived separately, and my dad and I lived together. So it was like the odd couple, my dad and myself. Fortunately,
How old were you when that happened?
I would have been 11.
Okay.
Something like that. So my sister was 7, so it affected her a lot more than me. I was already kind of mature enough, I guess, to understand what was going on at the time. So, but my parents, even though the family was separated, we always lived very close to each other. So that if any time I wanted to go over and walk to see my sister at their house or vice versa, that was fine. And we always made a plan to get together for birthdays and for Christmas, which in the later years also started to include either the boyfriends and girlfriends of my parents or eventually their spouses. So it was about as amicable a divorce as you could do. But
Did
that was
either of
done.
them have kids, more kids?
No.
So you're the only 2 kids between your 2 parents?
Correct.
And they
Correct.
never had other kids?
They never had other kids.
Are they
yeah.
still doing well? Are they alive?
So my dad actually passed away at a young age, accident. So that was quite tragic and a big shock to my sister and I at the time. But mom's still doing really well.
So how old were you when your father passed?
I was 94.
Oh, so you were out of the house
So
already.
I was 32.
Okay.
I had moved a year before that happened to Singapore, so I wasn't even in Canada when he passed.
I
So,
see.
but yeah. But Mom's still doing well. Unfortunately, I haven't seen her now for 3 years because of
No one has,
COVID
because of
traveling.
COVID,
But
yeah.
it looks like we're going to be trying to get over there in October.
So how old is your mom now?
She's 83.
83.
Yeah,
Doing
and,
well?
very well. She got remarried, but her second husband passed away like 12 years ago. So she's been on her own, but she's a real independent woman and stuff
She
like
might
that.
see this so you can say hello to your mom.
That'd be great. Hey, Mom, I'm on TV. Or something like that. So,
More
yeah.
like a podcast.
So my mom actually visited Tokyo numerous times over the
she
years.
really?
Yeah, she loved coming here, right? And because, well, in particular after her second husband passed away, right? Because in the latter years, his health was made it a challenge to try and get away, so she wasn't able to do that. But after he passed away, so she'd come for like a month at a time. And because not that many of my friends had parents that would make the journey over from wherever they were living, then my mom sort of became the surrogate mom for a whole bunch of people. Yeah, so we would have a boys' dinner once a month. This is my golf group, right? So and so my mom to this day is the only female that has ever been allowed to attend one of those dinners, is because of the fact it was a great opportunity for everybody to spend some time with her. So yeah, so she loved it.
Let's get into you as a kid. When you're a kid, were
Yeah.
you more academic or were you more sports minded? I'm talking about elementary.
Elementary school. Probably more academic, but not seriously academic. I feel quite fortunate because I was relatively smart, quick as a kid, especially with math. I remember, I don't know, some of the early years in school when the teacher's doing stuff up on the board and you made a mistake there. And yeah, so that was quite funny. So
you were the one.
yeah,
You were the guy in the back that was making
not heckling, not heckling,
but you were correct.
Yeah.
And they didn't like that. Yeah.
I think that's just one of those vivid memories, and I seem to recall that teacher was the piano teacher and a math teacher, and I go, well, clearly, hopefully your piano teaching ability is a little bit superior, right? So, but you know, young kids, so I used to ride my bike a lot, would play soccer. I tried tried multiple sports, like team sports when I was younger. I tried doing soccer. I did that for a couple of years, but it was always in the winter, so it was always cold and rainy. And I remember my mom one day when I came off the field, and she goes, "Have you had enough?" And I go, "Yeah, like I don't know. Other guys, if they love playing soccer, but I go, for me, I go, I don't love it enough to be like."
So were you really into books? You read a lot?
Actually, I don't recall that. I don't think that was a big thing. No, I was a real outdoor kid. Like I loved just being outdoors and on my bike and running around.
You had a lot of friends? Did you
get and it's interesting. I don't know how common that was, but it seemed like over the years. I mean, it was a big adjustment moving to Vancouver because I was in grade 2, so I was 7 years old. So suddenly you went from having no friends to, having a bunch of friends to having no friends, and you're in a new city.
Okay,
when we moved to Vancouver. And then, I don't know, every year the profile of the classes I was in changed a little bit, even though it wasn't that big of a school. But my friends, some of the friends remained the same, but some of them changed year by year by year. And that happened even going into high school. So a lot of the friends that I had tended to be, we were living in a sort of like a townhouse complex, right? So there was like a little mini community within that area, right? So it was great because you had a lot of people that you would be hanging out with. So, and a few of my friends over the years were also living in that area. But people move and that kind of stuff.
Did your father get married while you were living with him again?
No. So he got remarried.
So he never got married?
He got remarried.
No, I know that, but he waited until you left before he did that.
I'm just trying to think now. Not when I left Canada to go to Singapore. No, he got remarried like in the early '80s.
But you weren't living with him.
I think I was still living at home because so I would have been. I'm trying to think what year he got remarried. I was like maybe 19 or 20.
Okay,
so I was
you're pretty much you're on your way out.
I was on my way out. Yeah,
he knew that.
Yeah.
Did your mother get married prior to your sister leaving her?
No. That also happened. That also.
Night.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a deliberate, conscious thing or something like that. Might have been.
Yeah.
So.
I'm assuming it would have been.
Yeah.
She'll tell you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Well, she actually had a pretty long relationship, and the man that she eventually married was the man that actually got me into my career in the moving business.
So you're close with him. You guys were good friends.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that developed over time. So at the beginning, I mean, I don't know how old I would have been. I probably would have been. I mean, my first summer job, which he helped create, was when I was 15.
Okay.
So he owned a transportation company, they call it a freight forwarding company. So not a shipping company, but they're a logistics organizer and stuff. And part of the company was a moving section, so where they helped people that were moving overseas, right? So I had a plan one summer to go do some part-time work during my summer.
This was his own business?
His own business.
What was the name of it?
It was called All World Shipping.
All World Shipping.
Yeah.
And you worked with him?
I worked for him, for the company. So I had a plan to go work with a friend of mine that summer. Like, we didn't even know what we were going to do. We just talked about, like, let's go do something to try and make some money. So mow lawns or do this or do that. And so my mom mentioned that to him, and he goes, well, that doesn't sound very secure, right? Like, there's no fixed amount of money he can make. He goes, how about if Nick goes and works in the warehouse for the summer? So my mom talked to me about it, and I said, yeah, wow, that'd be cool. So that's what I did. So the first summer I was working with the warehouse managers, so we would sometimes get on the truck and go to people's houses to go pack boxes and pick up their things and bring them to the warehouse. I helped load and unload containers. I was building big wooden crates to put things inside.
And you're 15?
I was 15 years old, yeah. So I did that for that summer, so that was really, really cool. Sort of gave me the base foundation of understanding what was involved with moving. And then the next summer, I actually organized with my high school to finish classes 3 weeks early so that I could work longer. That
so you negotiated with him?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to, and the warehouse manager changed, so I show up the first week, I guess, or something like that. And then suddenly the guy at the end of the week, he says, well, we're not that busy next week, so you don't need to come in. And I'm like, what? And I said, like, I purposely finish school early so that I could make more money. And I go, so right away I called my mom and I go, I don't know what's going on, but like I'm now the warehouse says there's no work for me next week. So I got to go figure out what to do. So I got to make some money somewhere else, right? So then she mentions that to her husband, and he worked in the office. So they had a separate office and a separate warehouse. So he says, what can Nick do? And she says, well, he's a pretty good student, good at math. And he goes, the lady in the accounting department, she's going on holiday for 3 weeks. So maybe Nick can come into the office. So that's what I ended up doing. So the second summer, I basically worked in the accounting. I was 16 years old, working in the accounting department and learning all that. Also discovered a lot of mistakes, so sort of like when I was a kid in elementary school. And then when that lady came back, then it was like, then they just kept moving me to different departments in the office, and I started to learn a little bit about everything else. And then the following summer, then because I had that experience, I got to go back into the office again. So, I finished that first year of university in end of April. 81, and then I worked till December to make enough money to hopefully go travel. And he's giving you good
money. He's paying you pretty well.
I was getting paid pretty good, yeah. Not as much as maybe I could have made at the time, but eventually we'll get to that turning point in my life, because that explains why I didn't go back to university. So I took 7 months off, worked, got some money, went traveling with my friend to Australia. We were there for 5 months, so that was.
What made you want to do this? Where'd that come from?
Quite a few of our mutual friends, so like his brother and other people we knew had taken time off to go travel, either right after high school or taking a break at university or after they finished their degree. So just something to try and experience the world.
Now, 19?
So I would have been, we left at Christmas of 81, so I would have been 19 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so 5 years, so that was first time living away from home.
First time leaving. Did you guys travel a lot? There's another thing too. When you were younger, did you guys ever travel anywhere?
My family?
Yes.
Yeah. Like so like when the family was together, I know like in the summertime we would get in the car and we actually made multiple trips up and down the West Coast. So we went all the way down as far as California. So that was really cool. I remember that. Really, really well. Some cool experiences.
Had you ever left the continent? Had you ever left?
So we did that because of the fact that we had family in Holland. Like that's where all of our relatives are from because of my parents.
What age did you?
So I mean, I probably visited Holland. I think shortly after I was born. So like a year old or something, and then probably when I was like. I don't remember exactly. Yeah. I remember the first big trip that we probably made over as a family was probably when I was like maybe 10.
Okay.
And we were over there for like probably about a month.
Right.
Yeah, Canada.
I mean Canada. I'm sorry, outside the Americas. You've been outside America.
I know you constantly mix me up with yourself, which reminds me of another funny story. Right I remember you. This is in the early years when we knew each other, probably before you became president of TAC. But I guess you saw me getting involved here in the committees and stuff like that. And so actually originally when I joined TAC, I without knowing the rules, I thought I could join the board right away. Because I'd been on the board of governors at the American Club in Singapore, so I actually had 2 years of doing that. So I thought, so I wasn't like, that I'm so arrogant that I could join the board. But then when I inquired, and they go, well, no, you have to like be on a committee and da-da-da-da. And I go, so for an average expat, I go, like that's only here 3 years. I go, they will never be able to get on the board. And they go, we were talking one day, and I guess you saw my I don't know, leadership potential or something like that. So you said, just keep going on the membership committee, and maybe you were on the membership committee with me at the time. Mm-hmm. Several years later, I became chair, but then you wanted me to. I think it was you that got me to run for the board. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when we're having this talk before running for the board, you go, and then you'll do that for a few years, and then you'll be Canadian, and then you can run for president. And I go, no, I can't do that. And you go,
because you're a good person.
I think my response at the time made you think that I was uninterested or not committed and stuff like that.
You were more afraid.
No. I had to point out. I go, Lance, only Americans can be the president of the club. You were saying that I could become the president.
That's right. Right.
And then you'll be the president, and then I go, no, I can't. And you thought I was being humble or that I didn't have enough confidence, and I go, I can't. I go, I'm Canadian. I'm Canadian. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's interesting. After college,
yeah,
you're in college. Did you play any sports in school?
Yeah, I was never a fantastic at any particular sport, but I was pretty active. So in high school, I was on the tennis team. My dad was a very good tennis player. Taught me how to play tennis. I never got nearly as good as him, but got good enough to get on the team. Played on the basketball team, volleyball team. I ended up going back and playing soccer in grade 11 and grade 12, even though I hadn't played for years because they needed some more guys. And I go, yeah, I'm sure I could do that, right? So I was always out and doing stuff. So it was fun because that was just another way of interacting with a bunch of different guys. Right? So
you just spent 1 year in college and then you
went traveling. Right. Came back, and because
what was the trip like in Australia? What was that about?
It was pretty. I mean, it was an eye opener just because my friend and I had never lived away from home, so it was a big thing. But a lot of the people we knew had gone to Europe, which would have been a more interesting trip, but we wanted to do a working holiday. We arrived at sort of a bad time of the year, and I think that the global economy had kind of tipped into a recession at the time. So, and him and I on a working holiday, we were trying to apply for jobs, and just it wasn't working, so we just kept burning through our money. And eventually because the whole idea was we wanted to stay as long as possible, right? So he wanted to go back to school in the fall term, so he needed to be back by August. But I was sort of like open-ended, and I sort of thought if something comes along, I'm prepared to stay even longer, right? So we eventually went back, but yeah, we never. The ultimate goal was we wanted to get to the Barrier Reef, right, and see all that, but we didn't have enough money. We couldn't get there. And then there's some funny stories along the way, like, when we were in Sydney for like 10 days and we thought, okay, well, we can't get a job, so then let's start making our way because our goal is to get to the Barrier Reef, so head north, right? So I think we took a train and then we stayed in this kind of camping area for a while because we brought a tent with us and everything, so we were like backpacking. And then I think we spent, 4 or 5 days at this camping ground. Got to know a lot of the families that were there. We were the only ones in the tent. Everybody else had like a little mobile home or a caravan or something like that. And the two Canucks are sitting there, right?
Because they know about snakes and the other things out there that can kill you.
But we caught everybody's attention because we were throwing around an American football.
Okay.
One afternoon, right? And then they go, they must be from out of town.
Right.
So anyway, we got to. Actually, that was quite a funny story. So somebody came over and saw us, and we were chatting and stuff like that. And then we went and like hung out in our tent for a little while. And then somebody came over and said, "Hey, the family would like to invite you guys over for tea tonight." And we go, "Oh, wow, that'd be great." And I go, "So like what time?" And I go, like 7. So my friend and I, not understanding that tea in Australia means dinner.
Okay, I didn't know.
We thought it was drinking tea. Yeah, so we went and got some food at the snack bar that was like nearby and stuff like that. So we show up at their caravan. We show up at their caravan at 7. I can't remember. It was like a young family, I guess. And so they go. The father goes. So can I get you like a beer, or a cocktail? And I'm thinking, why would we want a beer when we're going to have like tea? Right? So we go, yeah, sure, I'll have a beer. And then as we're finishing our beer, they go, okay, and they move us into the next room, and the dining table's like all the table is like all laid out with food, and we're like, my buddy and I look at each other and go, what? So of course, since we were kind of full, we ate, but we couldn't eat that much. And then partway through the dinner, the wife says, "Boys don't eat very much for young men." And we go, "Well, sorry, the misunderstanding." I go, "You said tea, so we had dinner before we came over here." And then they realized that they should have explained what tea was.
Okay.
So yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, we then moved to the Gold Coast. We ended up spending a couple months there. We both got some part-time work there, but then we just realized like there's no way. Like we barely have. So we had to go back down to Sydney for the last part of the trip, which was about another 6 weeks and stuff like that. We both got some part-time work there because if we'd gone all the way up north, it would have been even more difficult to get work, right? So it basically turned into just an experience of being two young guys living away, first time having a roommate, so that was quite an experience as well. And he and I we knew each other fairly well because we were on the tennis team together and we had a lot of mutual friends and stuff like that. But until you live with somebody, you don't really know them. But I think, that probably works out a lot better with guys than it would with gals. So we made it work. And you had each other's backs, and so that all went fine. So then, fast forward that summer, I started working back at the moving company because there was no way I could make enough money over the summer to be able to go back to university in September. Gotcha. And by then, because I was quite independent, I was still living at home, but I wasn't about to ask my dad for financial help. It never dawned on me at the time that I could have actually worked part-time. I don't know why I didn't have the presence of mind to think that I could have gone to university and even worked part-time at that same company, right? So I continued to work with them until the following spring, and then I went and registered to go back to school in September, and then I had the next day the boss calls me in and he says, so like you're going back to school? And I go, yeah. I said, that's it, right? And he goes, well, why is that? And I go, well, I need to build a career. And he goes, you could have a career here. And I said, well, no. And he goes, well, why not? And I said, well, first of all, you don't pay me enough. And I said, I need to go to university, get my degree. Hopefully I'll have more qualifications.
Is this your mother's husband?
No, by then he had actually sold the company, so it was the new owner that was having this one-on-one with me.
Right.
So he said, so if we offered you more money, would you stay? And I guess I was doing a good enough job at the time that he threw that out on the table, right? So I said, well, I don't know. And I said, how much money are we talking about? He says, well, I don't know. What would you need? And I said, well, I'd need a lot to not go back to school. He says, well, think about it, right? So then I called my mom and talked to her and her husband, boyfriend, because they weren't married. And so she says, tell him to double your salary. He'll never do it. So I wrote it all out. So base salary, I wanted car allowance. I was 21 at the time, car allowance, and then I wanted a bonus based on the profit for the little department that I was running, right? So put it all in a letter. Put it on his desk at the end of that day. Went home, came in the next morning, he calls me into his office and he says, you're serious? He says, that's what it would take that. And I go, yeah, if you don't want me to go back and you want me to stay. I go, that's it. No negotiation. He said, okay.
And you went, would you?
And I'm like, what? Yeah.
Did you say, you're just kidding? And you looked for the cameras?
Well, then I had to call my mom and I said, you said he wouldn't agree to it, and he did. Now what am I supposed to do? Because I go...
What did you tell him? You said I have to wait before...
I said I wasn't expecting you to agree to that, right?
So then what did you say? You said, well, I won't then.
I said, no. I said, I need some time to think about it, right?
And what did he say?
And he said, okay, that's fine. Because I'd already signed up to go back to university, right? So then I had the conversation more so with my mom, even though I was living with my dad. And I go, Mom, I said, I'm now going to be getting more money than my friends that are graduating from university. And I go, this seems like a no-brainer. And I go, and I'm only 21. I go, if it doesn't work out in a couple of years, you just go back to school. So that was it. So then
she said that to you?
No, I said that to her.
And what did she say?
I think she was disappointed that I wasn't going to university, but I think she was also pragmatic about it and going, hey,
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, and da-da-da-da. So I worked for that company for a few more years, but I kept butting heads with the owner and the partner.
Well, you kept on correcting their math problems?
No, kind of like that. Actually, that's ironic that you say that, right? Because I go... Even though I was quite young and I had my own department, I was somebody that just had a very holistic view of being an employee, and I would keep my eyes open and hear and listen and stuff like that. And there was this time when they were talking about they were organizing containers of products that would come from Europe to Canada, and they would have various customers' goods in these containers, and all shapes and sizes, different things, heavy things, bulky things, and stuff like that. And they realized that recently they were losing money on their containers, right? And they couldn't figure out why it was going on. I was kind of listening, and I go, well, it's because you're not loading the containers properly. And they go, well, what do you mean? Like, well, you got heavy cargo and you got bulky cargo. So probably what's happened is they're putting so much heavy cargo in the container at the beginning because that's your important customer, and then the container gets maxed out on the weight, and so even though it's half full, you can't put anything more in there. So they've got to balance the container more properly. And they go, you're right. I was there for a couple of years, and my department made a lot of money, you know. And I remember the lady that was running an export section, she used to come up to me and she goes, how do you make so much money? And I go, well, I charge what the market will bear. And she goes, well, how do you decide that? I go, well, there's no trick to it. I go, start high, and if they complain, then you reduce the price, but you don't start low.
That's right.
Right?
Because it's harder to go up than it is to come down.
Correct. Yeah, well, basically you can't go up.
That's right.
Yeah, so Vancouver for a company that had moving company operations in quite a few different countries around the world. So that was pretty exciting. I was starting basically a new office at the age of 24 for a global company. So yeah, very cool. Yeah.
So you kept on advancing from there.
Yeah.
How'd you? So how many companies did you go? How many moving companies did you go to before you started with Asian Tiger?
So then I stayed with that company. That started in '86. That company globally got acquired by a big company called Crown Worldwide, Red Crown. It's very famous. They acquired that company in '89, and then I stayed with them till '93 because I got it in Vancouver. Yeah, because starting, I guess, around the early '90s, I was sort of getting a little bit restless and sort of going, I've done about as much as I can in the Vancouver market because it's not that big, and I sort of go, I'd like to try and go do something else and go live in another country, right? So I started talking to different companies about that, and that's not such an easy thing to do. But eventually, yeah, I got a phone call one day from a guy that was based in Jakarta and talking to me about moving to Singapore. They'd previously talked to me about going to run their company in the Philippines, and I'd been to the Philippines a couple of times before, and I said, I'm not sure.
Well, there's a network of people. Wait, how do they know about you?
So, because every year in the moving industry, there are conferences. So global conferences where people get together, and I'd been going to these conferences since I was like 20 years old. So you get to meet the people that you do business with, and the person that offered me a job was one of my previous customers. That company, right? So, at the age of 31, I moved to Singapore, which was a big deal. Like, first time living away from Canada. And suddenly I went from running a company that was doing like $1 million in sales to a company that was doing $5 million in sales, which dramatically different. And we had our own big warehouse and everything. And well, it was odd because I flew from Vancouver to Singapore to meet the guy that called me to offer the position, right?
And he's paying for all this.
He's paying for it all, right? So I secretly flew over, and then of course, because I haven't resigned from my company, I hope to God nobody finds out that I'm in Singapore. Like what's going on, right? So, but I remember after it all kind of was agreed. And I go, that the guy didn't really interview me, like to talk to me about like the business and, you know, here's our budget and, you know, and what do you, he'd already decided. And I thought, apart from like drinking together and having some dinners and talking business as partners, I go, you really don't know anything about me. But I guess he did. He had a good enough This is with my faded memory. So I go, maybe there was enough Q&A during the time that we were talking and I was nervous too, right? You know, I'm sitting there going, wow, this is the big league. Like this is like this was the chance of a lifetime for me at that point in time, right? I remember just after I finished the phone call and I hung it up and just from hearing what the guy had said to me, and I go, I feel like I just won the lottery. That's exactly how I felt.
But what did you plan on doing with all of this? I'm just curious. You're 31.
Yeah.
You're not married.
I was married at the time, and that was important because of the fact that that was a big decision for the two of us.
Okay.
Because my wife had a pretty good job at the time in Vancouver as well. So we had to be pragmatic about this and say that even though this job sounded really attractive, I go, she might not be able to work, or we have to imagine that she won't be able to work. So whatever I'm going to be getting has to be similar to the two of us, right? Which this was the first time that anything like that had ever been presented. That like on paper, it looked like that had the potential, and it was exciting, right? So so anyway, and then actually, it's an interesting part of the story because actually for my first wife, this actually ended up being a life-changing moment for her as well, the whole move to Singapore. Because when we met through university, so even though I wasn't going to university, I'd already developed enough friends at university that even though I was working full-time, those were now my friends, because my high school friends were kind of like gotten done and dusted kind of thing, right? She graduated with a teaching degree, but at the time when she graduated, she could not get a job as a teacher. Okay. She did get one offer to go be a teacher, but it was meant being like way up north. So then that turned into a relationship defining moment of like, well, what are we going to do? And I go, well, I said, well, you just spent years going to school, and if that's where the teaching job is and you love being a teacher and you want to go there, I said, I'm not going to tell you not to go. And of course, that's the last thing that a woman wants to hear is I go, so sort of like she heard that as, so you want me to go? Like, leave, please go, right? But it wasn't that, right? So then fast forward, we get to Singapore, and I'm working, and she said, well, what am I going to do? Because she'd gotten a job in the private sector doing marketing and stuff like that, and done very, very well for herself. And I said, well, you could go do that. I mean, it's a big city and lots of different companies. So just go talk to a recruiter or something like that and start putting. Or there's all these foreign schools here. I said, maybe you could get a job working as a teacher. And he says, well, that's never going to happen. She goes, I graduated like 5 years ago, and I haven't been a teacher since, or I haven't been a teacher. And I go, well, the worst thing that'll happen is you call them all and they all say no. But she ended up getting a teaching job there, and she never looked back. So she actually, from the time that we moved to Singapore, she got to live out her dream of being a teacher. So me sitting with a fellow named Ray De Silva, who was like a senior vice president of the Crown Group at the time, and the owner of the company, Jim Thompson, who started the company from scratch, the origins of that company in Japan, so kind of ironic. And so we're sitting there, and of course he knew just from being my competitor for the 4 years that I was rocking that company, right? And so he says, but what happened? And I said, I have no idea. I said, I obviously pushed his button or said something wrong. And I said, go ask Jim, because the guy that fired me was actually a senior employee of Crown way, way back. And at one point in time, he left the company. He was living in Hong Kong and started a rival competitor and took like literally half the staff with him, right? So I'm sitting there thinking, I go, well, if you want to know why I got fired, I go, probably Jim knows better than I would about what makes that guy tick, the guy that fired me, right? So anyway, so fast forward, back in Vancouver, I'm like looking around, nothing's really happening. And then one day, it's like, so we left at the end of 97 back in Vancouver. It's like the summer of 98. And I got a phone call from a former competitor in Singapore. I don't even know how he got my number, but somehow he tracked me down. He calls and he goes, so somebody asked me for a recommendation for somebody to be like a country manager in Japan, Tokyo. And you go, would you be interested? I go, yes, definitely. Because I'd actually been to Tokyo a bunch of times before, including in early 97. So before my job ended, I flew from Singapore to come up and visit the office here. And I go, yeah. And I go, who is it? And he goes, I can't tell you. I'm just going to tell them. Da, da, da. So the cool thing about that story is I go, that was my competitor, former competitor, had so much respect for me that he didn't hesitate to introduce me to a potential company regarding a job. And then I got a character reference then from another former competitor in Singapore during the interview process and stuff like that. And then one of the shareholders because it was a startup company here, Asian Tigers, it started at the beginning of '98. So when I arrived in October, the company had been going for about 10 months.
Okay.
But it was a joint venture. There was a bunch of individual single investors that pooled their money and one of the investors was my biggest competitor in Singapore.
Okay.
So I just sort of thought, isn't that ironic? The company that I was doing all that hard work for, and I get fired summarily, and everybody else thinks that I'm that good enough that, hey, let's get this guy to go run Japan. So yeah, so then I ended up here. So never imagined I would be here that long. So
And that was a drop the mic moment, huh?
it was big, right? But the first 12 months, not even 12, the company wasn't set up very well. And in the start of the company, one of the investors was based in Europe, and they had a division of their moving company that handled Japanese customers, so Japanese expats moving from Europe back to Japan. And I guess they became so successful that they were sending so much business and using a third-party agent here that eventually they go, we got enough business that we could start our own company there. So they were going to open a company, and then this other group of investors that had offices all around Asia but didn't have a setup in Tokyo, and they also were working with a different third party. They also wanted to, so these two different groups were thinking of starting offices in Tokyo at the same time, and somehow they got to talk and they go, well, then we might as well do it together. So it started as kind of a joint venture. So when I arrived, 90% of the revenue was from the Japanese section, right, and coming in. And because of my origins in the business being from the very bottom up, like warehousing and operations and finance and everything, I mean, I understand
exactly
everything, right? And the guy that was running the company and helped set it up and stuff like that, no malice meant, right? It was just somebody that was managing something and he didn't understand the full complexity of it, right? So, but when I arrived, I just thought everything was hunky-dory, and I was coming in basically to now start the non-Japanese business, so going out and dealing with all the foreign community that were here in Singapore. So everything, basically we were cold calling and going and visiting companies and networking like crazy that first 9 months. And we were still losing money, and I go, that's impossible. Like, how could we be losing money? And I sort of thought, well, then there's got to be something wrong just operationally with the company. So there was no accounting system, not a very good one. So I literally took a whole bunch of, I think I took 3 months of files and just went through it, and I started making spreadsheets and figuring it out. And I eventually realized that the pricing that the guy running the company had agreed with a contractor, that the whole pricing system was heavily weighted in their favor. It didn't work, right? And we had another vendor that we could have used, and when I looked at the prices that they would charge for the same business, it made a massive difference. It was like $100,000 saving for 3 months. And I reported that all to the main shareholder in London. And at the beginning, there was all this pushback because the Japanese guy in London, and because he was the guy that had sent the Japanese guy to run the company here, of course he's defending this guy. And I go, I'm not trying to pick a fight here. I said, I'm giving you the black and white figures. I go, I'm not making this up. I said, I'm just saying simple math that if we move to this sort of a pricing system, which maybe we could do that with the current vendor if they would agree to it, right? So it was really awkward. So the guy that was he was running the company, and nobody had told the guy when I got into Japan that I was now the actual head of the company. So he thought that he and I were kind of equal, or he was a little bit above me or whatever. Mm-hmm. So but that's sort of when he realized that no, Nick's actually in charge. So he felt like he'd lost so much face. So he ended up leaving Japan, and he ended up getting transferred to their office in Paris. So, but that whole episode created so much stress because that took like several months and back and forth, and then I'm getting like sort of not assassinated, but like character assassination, like questioning my motives and what am I doing, and disrespecting, and I'm just like, you know what, I don't need this, right? But my wife had already started working as a teacher here, right? Because we actually moved together here. So we went back to Vancouver, then this job came up in Tokyo, so we ended up coming here together.
Okay.
And then it was a year after we came to Tokyo that we finally split.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, so then that summer, like, I was just like stressed out. I'm just like, wow, really? I don't need this, like, to have a fight. No, this is all before the Japanese guy left and everything, right? But so finally they said, okay, so then we went to talk to the contractor, we redid the contract, and and then suddenly we were making money. So we went, and all that we did was just change the vendor relationship, right? So that was cool. And then we grew real quick, but kind of under the radar, because we had, our main competitors at the time was my previous company, Global, and Red Crown, and they'd both been in the market here for, like, I don't know, 20 years. So I mean, we were the new kid on the block. About a year after I got here, another competitor that was more of a Japanese company, but they had a lot of global partners that were supporting them because they didn't want to work with either of the other two guys. And when they went bankrupt, so suddenly we got this big rush of business that came in. So that would have been 2000. And so we were growing so quick that I was hiring people before I kind of needed them because I didn't want to be late, right? And then bam, 9/11.
Knocked you right in the socks.
Yeah. So nobody wanted to get on a plane, let alone move to another country. So business just kind of, not grinded to a halt, but it dropped like 30%, so bam, and suddenly I've got an overhead I was hiring ahead of the curve. So I suddenly I'm overweight, right? And then the Japanese section wasn't doing as well, and it was like a perfect storm, and I'm like, wow, what are we gonna do? So the one and only time in the whole 20 years that I worked with the company where I actually had to fire some people, I had to retrench some people, so that was not a great situation. Right around that same time, we had already committed to the idea of opening an office in Osaka because we thought that would be a good opportunity. So the timing of opening a new office in Osaka, literally months after the 9/11, was a disaster, right? Just because there wasn't enough business to support it.
How long did that office last?
2 years. 2 years, which is probably a year longer than it should have. But it was sort of like nobody knew that the effects of 9/11 were going to linger for that long.
Right.
Yeah. What year did I meet my current wife? It's 2017. And when we first started dating, I just said to her, I just need to let you know, I said, at some point in time, I think I need to make a move and go try living somewhere else. I loved living here, but life is short too, right? And I just sort of thought to myself, I'd like to change things up a little bit. And also, I think...
your wife is Japanese.
And she's Japanese. And I kind of felt like I had done everything that I could with Asian tigers. And the company was kind of on autopilot.
Okay.
You know, I had an awesome team of guys that ran the company, and I'm there, and I'm the face of the company, and I'm very involved here at TAC and networking in the community.
So much,
Philanthropy. We haven't even talked about philanthropy part. So I was actually having a discussion for the last couple of years with my company about sort of taking a step back, still being involved in overseeing the company, but not necessarily having to be here hands-on, and that I would like to live somewhere else.
What are you doing now, anyway? By the way,
so I'm living in Malaysia now, right? So because even though I'm from Canada, and even though I like the idea of going and living somewhere else, when I had that's the part I didn't continue with. When I first met my wife and we're dating and all that, and I started talking about, like, at some point in time I'm going to leave. So are you cool with that? Because I go, if that's a deal breaker, then we might as well just stop now, because then that's not practical, right? And she goes, okay, I'd be open to that. And she goes, where? And I said, I don't know. And she goes, Canada? And I said, no. I said, I'm not going to move backwards. I'm going to move on to something else. And if I've got to start my life new somewhere, then we'll start it new, not old new, right? So I started evaluating different things, and it was actually my wife who ended up deciding that Malaysia, because I hadn't really thought about it. It was sort of on my radar, but then she started talking about it in his English, because I'd been thinking a little bit more about Thailand, so it was within Asia, but I didn't want to live in Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, so I was kind of thinking Malaysia or Thailand. And then when she pointed the obvious about English speaking, and Singapore was a consideration as well, but just the cost of living there was higher. So, so then that's what it was going to be. I also own a small business here in Japan that I started in 2005 that does like import marketing of consumer products and stuff like that, right? It's a fairly small business.
You run that from Malaysia?
So I've kind of like I'm a 50-50 partner with Brian Nelson. Yeah. So we started that company together.
That's right. With the
there's lots of different products. There's a lot of different things that we've sold over the years, and every year, every 2 years, the whole lineup of products that we sell changes because it's consumer products that we sell, but everything is kind of connected to health and wellness. So at the time, I was thinking, well, how am I gonna get into Malaysia? So I was looking at either they had a retirement visa program there, they had this program, but suddenly when it came out that I was no longer at Asian Tigers, a Japanese fellow that owns a Japanese moving company that has offices throughout Southeast Asia says, why don't you come and work for me? And I go, well, what? And he goes, well, because of all your connections, he goes, our core business is moving Japanese expats, but we've got all the scale there, the company's all that. So if you could just bring more businesses that is not Japanese, he goes, that would be like a great fit.
So where are you?
So that's what I did. So
what's the name of the company?
It's called Crown Line.
Crown Line.
So so that's a little bit confusing because it's so similar to the other Crown.
And you're the head of that in Malaysia?
I'm not the head of that in Malaysia. So my role is, the best way I could describe it is I'm like the group business development manager, right? So I talk to people that I have as business contacts in our industry from all around the world, and they have the ability to pick and choose who they would like to work with as a partner in Singapore or Tokyo or Indonesia or Malaysia. And I've convinced them to give me some of their business. So that's what it's been. So it's actually been quite fun because now I'm not running the actual company, but I'm back to doing my root thing because, the early days of running Asian Tigers here, even though I was the manager of the company, but basically I was a full-time sales guy. I'm just running and chasing business because we got to get business, right? And the only way we're going to get it is we got to get it from somebody else, right? So it was exciting, but just an awkward time. We moved to Malaysia at the beginning of March 2020, and that's just before the storm started with everything. So it was tough. So it's going well. It's gone well.
So how did you get started with philanthropy? You've been a mover for so long, and you've known so many different people and so many different organizations.
Yeah.
What made you get involved with philanthropy?
Okay, so actually that's an interesting question, right? So it's going to sound weird to say this, but the catalyst for my journey to get involved with philanthropy, it was actually spawned by 9/11. So, living in Tokyo, away from home, big event. I remember vividly where I was when that all happened, right? I was with some friends and we're watching it on TV and it's like, is this a movie? Like, what's going on, right? And then over the next several weeks and months, you're living away from, and I'm single at the time, right? And most of my friends are married and some of them have kids and stuff like that. But I started to realize, how incredibly important my friends were here because my friends here were my family. So what I wanted to, I had already been started to think about trying to formalize a group of friends. So I had been trying to create sort of a social club. So we created a group called Craft, which the underlying principles of it were we all want to go out and play golf when we can. We're going to have a group dinner once a month at a different venue. And we're going to use our dinner experience as a platform to raise money for charity by charging slightly more for the dinner than what the dinners cost, and then that money goes into our charity fund. So we did that. So for the first year, I think we generated about 600,000 yen of money, but then we realized we didn't have an end target of where to give the money. And this was 2002. And 20 years ago, there just weren't, this is all pre Vicky's Philanthropy and other ones and stuff like that. So we eventually, something landed on my desk about the YMCA and handicapped children. I go, wow, that's a cool idea, right? So, sorry, I'll back up. So that when I wrote the sort of the charter, which was just a one-page thing, maybe a little bit too much to call it a charter, but I sort of said, all of us should be thankful for the lives that we enjoy here in Japan, and I feel as a result of that we owe it to the community to give back. So our initial foundation for doing that, I would like to make it the dinner. So instead of us paying 7,000 yen for dinner, we're going to pay 10, and then the balance goes into this charity fund, right? So we started with that and started giving money to the Y. And then a couple of years after, I think a year into doing that, the Y then asked me if somebody from our golf group could be on their board. So Brian got involved he actually joined the Y on the board before I did. And then not long after that, they asked me if I would also be interested. So then I joined as well. And then very quickly, both Brian and I got much more involved because they had a general committee back then, and then they had like a operating committee. So I think both of us got involved in the operating committee quite quickly into it all. And then suddenly, Marco Crivelli suddenly left Japan, and suddenly they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We'd like you to be the president." And I go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa!" I go, "I've just gotten onto this horse." I go, so, and then it just grew from there, right? In the early days of the Y, they used to do letter campaigns where they would write letters to people that you know and ask them to make a donation. And by then I was I was very well connected, and I just thought, wow, okay, I should be good at this. I go, I know so many people, so I wrote, I don't know, 100 letters or something, 2 donations, 2 people out of the 100 that I wrote a person, like a letter, not an email, like a physical letter, and I'm like, wow, and I just came back down to earth, and I'm sort of like, wow, and I go, so either I don't know those people as well as I do, or people just are that uninterested in philanthropy or whatever. Maybe my letter wasn't compelling enough or whatever. So I thought, well, that doesn't work. So then what am I going to do? So then I came up with the idea. I was very fortunate over all the years I worked with Asian Tigers to have a very nice home, including the second apartment. You came a couple times, I think, to my Hanabi party.
Never came to your apartment. I missed out on that.
Okay.
But you did. You invited me.
Yeah. So I found out after I moved into my apartment. I moved in November, whatever year it was, and the following summer, I realized that I could see the Jingu Hanabi from my apartment, and I thought, that's it. Next year I'm going to have a party, and I'm just going to invite people. And that party continued year after year for, I don't know, I think we had 12 or 13 years, something like that. And that party generated anywhere between 1 million and 2 million yen for the night, because everybody that came paid money to come in. I had some sponsors that were helping to pay for the food and the drinks that were purchased to it, and so that was great. So over the history of my friends and me, because I go, it was my house, but it took a lot of people to pull that event off, right? But we donated, I think, to the Y over the years something like 20 million yen, probably more than that. Like we didn't keep a proper log.
But you used a different name.
You
didn't use YMCA as the name.
It was called the FCSC, right? The Foreign Community Supporting Committee, which was sort of a satellite group that was connected to the Y. And the YMCA throughout Japan, in their different centers, they have programs, educational and summer camps for handicapped children. I thought that was incredibly cool, because when we were looking at different things that we could have donated to, we did consider the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and there were a couple other things that were kind of like individual donations to help one person. And I sort of thought, wow, helping people with disabilities and children, let alone, and it's a lifetime disability. It's not a medical issue for a short period of time, or in the case of Make-A-Wish, sad as it is, it's an end of life moment. So you're giving a child usually an end of life dream experience and stuff like that, right? So all of us love that. Roland is the head.
He's the head of it.
Yeah. So they actually kind of rebranded that
It's
small
called-
group the Up Foundation.
Because I remember I was a part of it when they decided to rebrand it.
Yeah, that was another huge aspect of my life, was hosting that party every year, because it was like, I don't know, 100 to 130 people every year coming into my home, right? So a little bit scary at times, but people were always very respectful, and the neighbors were tolerant. Not so much at the beginning, but I finally realized that I needed to explain what was going on so that they just didn't think it was some big hoo-ha.
Right.
So I wrote a letter in Japanese and I explained what was going on, and then I put on the other side, I explained where the money was going and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Wow.
And then they, one of the most humbling experiences I've had in my life, possibly apart from getting married and having a child, was I got nominated to the Japan Philanthropy Association to get some recognition, and they selected me to get an award. That's about 10 years ago, and to this day I believe I'm the only non-Japanese person that's ever been recognized by their association. So the fact that I even got interviewed to talk about what I did and how I felt and stuff like that was already like quite an experience. And I don't showboat about what I do about philanthropy, because it's not necessary. Some people do, but then that means that they're not doing it for altruistic reasons, right? So, but yeah, that was a highlight of my life. And,
but you're not even here now, and you're still coming to that event.
Yeah, because that's kind of like you're tied to it for life. And Roland's a friend, and if I like helping my friends. If friends need help, then I'll be there. So, assuming that they need the help, because we got friends that are asking for help that
they don't really need
or
the help.
don't deserve the help. So,
I hear.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're going to end on this note.
Okay.
Over the time you lived here in Japan, I like to ask people this question.
Okay.
Would you consider a good life in Japan?
A good life in Japan. Wow. I guess for me, just because it was such a critically important part of my life. I mean, you've got the obvious thing of you have to have a good home and you have to have a good job and everything else, and that's your foundation. But if you talk about what keeps you here, I think the reason that I stayed here and that I flourished and I grew was because of my friends. But I also drove that, right? Meaning that I helped create that. Now, there were people that were involved in my early years here in Japan that were real connectors, right? So there are people that were part of my life and that are still part of my life that actually connected to me to the early people and stuff like that. But most of my friends know me as the person. It's like, I don't know almost anybody that knows more people than Nick Masee.
That's true.
Right? You know,
That's
so
true. And it's done more for people too.
yeah.
Through your moving company and stuff, you've helped out so many people.
So I would say that if it wasn't for having that, it would have been a harder time being here, you know, because I was single for a lot of those years. And now I wasn't scared of moving to a new country, because I'd done that before. I lived in Singapore and I lived here and everything else. But moving to a new country during a period of COVID where everybody's wearing a mask, damn, it's hard to make friends. But I'm trying, because we get in the elevator and nobody says anything. But I go, how are you?
You don't want to cough.
How you doing? Yeah.
You don't want to cough.
But I find myself probably, for every one person that might say hello to me, I'm probably doing 10x, right? But it's been a quiet first 2 years in Malaysia. So,
Wow, that's wonderful.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, and then there's so many things about Japan, and I go, and there's mixed feelings, but fortunately, because my wife is Japanese and Malaysia is not the other side of the world, it's only a 7-hour flight, we're fortunate enough that we're going to be able to maintain our connections here and have TAC as a place that I can come back and visit. I kept my, so I'm a life member. Yeah, so that's, yeah.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you so much.
Hey, good to
for
see you.
taking the time.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic and interesting talk, and I'm really so happy and pleased that you decided to do it, because you were giving me a little hard time at the beginning.
Well, I was just trying to think. I go, what am I going to talk about? And then I go, I got a lot of stuff I could talk about. Right? Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe And remember, it's all unknown, so continue to reach for the stars because you're too blessed to be stressed.